I think it was expected that the decision would go in this direction. The decision ultimately made by the Communities and Housing Secretary, Steve Reed. You're right, though, it will be controversial. It has been controversial, and we're already getting reaction from some spokespeople, actors around Westminster, essentially saying that it's the wrong decision and that it will be challenged. Basically, what this written ministerial statement says, it's essentially the sort of equivalent of a minister standing up in the Commons and saying it out loud. This is the written version of that that's just been published on Parliament's website. Essentially, it confirms the decision that has been made by Steve Reed, the Housing Secretary, to give permission to the new embassy being built in London. That's at Royal Mint Court in the Tower of London in the city, sort of towards the east of the central bit of London, and saying the decision is in line with the recommendation of the independent planning inspector. One bit of this that may well cause a little bit of anger amongst critics of this is a section that says the Secretary of State agrees that any ethical or similar objections to the provision of an embassy for a specific country cannot be a material planning consideration. So, look, there's a lot to get through here, but sort of what that says to me, how I read that, is essentially the political argument being made by critics of China, critics of the administration in Beijing, around why such a vast embassy or establishment shouldn't be in central London, that they essentially shouldn't make any difference to the decision that is being made. Where does this go from here? Well, I think the most immediate reaction that I'm more interested in, almost than MPs in Westminster, is the reaction that potentially comes when one Donald Trump wakes up in Washington. We know all about his concerns around whether the West, whether the UK and Europe are taking Chinese influence and Chinese strength more seriously enough. That is part of the reason he gave for rather belatedly hitting out at the decision to transfer sovereignty over Diego Garcia, US-UK base, military base, and the rest of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, because he felt that that sent the wrong message to other big world players like China and like Russia. So how might he react to a huge site like this being approved for redevelopment right in the centre of London to the Chinese? We heard from the Republican House Speaker, Mike Johnson, who's been over in the UK today. He's been speaking to MPs and peers this morning, actually, and in that address this morning, talking about the need to combat countries, undemocratic countries like China. When he sat down with Sky News' Will Frost earlier this week, he talked about his reservations, if you like, around the transfer and the permission being given to the Chinese to redevelop that embassy, almost saying that the US would have liked to have acquired that. In the past, Donald Trump has actually criticised the new US embassy that is relatively new anyway, built not too far from Westminster over towards Battersea Park. That was a new embassy transferred over from the centre of London. So it feels to me you're talking about things where Chinese influence, geopolitics and real estate combine. It does feel to me something that Donald Trump may feel that he wants to comment on. And I think set against the backdrop of the Greenland threats, the backdrop of what Donald Trump said about the Chagos Islands this morning, this could be something that inflames the situation further. I think then the reaction you will get from MPs here in Westminster, yes, you may get some anxiety from Labour MPs, but generally the bigger contingent of China sceptics in Parliament come from the Conservative Party, and the worries that they have been putting forward is essentially you are allowing China, a regime that they see as intensely hostile to the UK and Western democracy in every possible way, to be given a huge foothold, a huge base right in the centre of London, very close to the financial centre of London, the financial centre of the UK, the City of London, and potentially close to vital cables running underneath the ground close to the embassy as well. So they portray this as allowing China to build, bluntly, a spy centre in the centre of London. When you talk to others that know about how this sort of stuff works, though, they say, well, actually, there's a possibility here that security services are more relaxed about this than you may think, because what this the building of this embassy would involve is essentially taking several separate Chinese sites that could have been used for intelligence operations and combining them into one site. So if you're MI5, if you're working in the security services and trying to monitor Chinese espionage within the UK, you've potentially got fewer sites to monitor, fewer sites to try and establish what is going on in than you did before. I find it hard to believe that this would have gone ahead if there had been very, very severe reservations made by the security services. Of course, people that have worked in government before, like Dominic Cummings, the number 10 former chief advisor, have said that he believes there were reservations and criticisms made by security services. But I suspect the argument we will hear being made, maybe not on the record, because I guess it's just not how this sort of briefing happens, but more off the record, is that actually when it comes to security, having people in one place could be easier for security services to monitor. And the stuff that actually they are more concerned about security services is the things that they don't know about, the things that the operations potentially being waged by Chinese espionage operatives that they are not so aware of, that are not tied to a set location like this. And then finally, it obviously plays into the broader foreign policy approach of this government towards China. I think in the last year of the Tory government, you did start to see a sort of thawing in relations with James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary at the time, giving a speech about how we needed to engage with China. I think Keir Starmer has almost picked up that baton and ran with it and wants to get to a point that rather than blowing hot and cold, as he puts it, on China, going through a period of saying we're going to ban this, we're going to ban Huawei and strip this out of our telecoms network, and going very hard in a China skeptic direction, and then sort of flipping back when it's in our interest on the economy, he sort of wants to ride both horses at once. He wants to articulate the challenges and the threats posed by China, but also be pretty frank that actually the world's second largest economy, that could be the world's largest economy in the near future, a country that really leads in many of the modern technologies that will define our future, from green tech, electric cars to solar panels and AI, a country that is ingratiating itself into the global regulatory structures in many different industries, that bluntly Keir Starmer will make the argument it is in the national interest to engage with China and we can't not engage with them. So I expect that to be the argument you hear from the government now, that they're basically clear-eyed about the risks and threats, but ultimately they believe those threats can be managed, and the broader thrust is that engagement with China is in the national interest. But look, there will be critics of that policy that believe that it needs to be harder-nosed, and that in the years to come we will perhaps look back at decisions like this in the same way we look back at that so-called golden age of China that David Cameron spearheaded when Xi Jinping came over and drank a pint with him near Chequers. When we look back at that and think, was the government being a bit naive? I think sceptics right now maybe worry that the government is being a bit naive right now. But yes, sure to cause some domestic political controversy. I think within the context of what's going on across the Atlantic, though, it's Donald Trump's reaction that I'm potentially more interested in.
Rob Howell in Westminster for the moment. Thank you so much. Just a little bit of reaction, actually, from the Cabinet Office. A government spokesperson saying national security is our first duty. Intelligence agencies have been involved throughout the process, and an extensive range of measures have been developed to manage any risks. Following extensive negotiations in recent months, the Chinese government's agreed to consolidate its 7 current sites in London into one site, bringing clear security advantages. National security, our first duty, so says a government spokesperson. We're going to get plenty of reaction and insight and analysis into this decision and all of the day's geopolitics, because there's no shortage of it, here on Sky News.